Welcome and thank you for tuning in. You're listening to the Beyond 50 radio program. I'm Daniel Davis. When our connection with nature is interrupted or disconnected, many people begin to experience feelings of separation, isolation, or a deep void that can't seem to be filled by anything in the material world. Although we try to fill this void with anything that we can think of, often with things that don't serve us, we try to find ways that perhaps we can get that connection back. Joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program today is someone who did that very thing by healing her personal trauma, by developing a deeper connection with spirit, and bringing gifts as a psychic medium and healer to the world, to be able to get people to be reconnected again. And her roots go back as far as the Celtic ancestry, which is pre-Christian, and she is of Irish, Scottish, and English descent. I'd like to welcome to the Beyond 50 radio program today our guest, Malia Miller-Pierce. Malia, thank you for joining us here on the program today.
Hi, Daniel. It's an honor to be here. Thank you.
You know, I'm looking through the information that my producer gave me here, and it's quite extensive in what you do. Tell us about how you got started about all this.
Yeah, I'd love to. So I have an interesting background. I'm actually a biologist, so I'm a scientist, and I've spent most of my life in school studying nature and ecosystems and how they function and things like that. And just a few years ago, I had some pretty deep personal stuff happen where I was very, very depressed and going through a really difficult time in my life. And so I basically get to the point where I wasn't sure, if I wanted to live anymore, and trying to reconnect and find a deeper connection in order to decide if I wanted to continue on. And so a friend introduced me to this work called Core and Cellular Transformation. And it just so happened that I was arriving very much serendipitously the night before the workshop started. And this is in Maui, where I grew up in the summers, where my dad still lives. And so I showed up not really knowing what to expect at all, and sat down in this circle and with this amazing, beautiful man named Gerald Lyons, who's my teacher, who I've been being trained from for a couple of years now. And it just completely blew me away. It was a 6-day workshop, and I experienced very deep, extreme healing, personal healing in the workshop. And I basically walked away with a renewed sense of passion for life and very much wanting to live again. And then realizing, what was not working for me in my life anymore, the attachments I had that I needed to let go of in order to gain a deeper connection, basically be happy again. So, yeah, the work was just, it's completely, for me, very much my medicine. So it's medicine I needed to find connection in my life. And I believe that there's medicine out there for everyone. Everyone has kind of their own type of medicine that works for them. And this is very much my own medicine, and it's connected to, in my personal feeling, is connected to my ancestry. So a deep connection to Ireland. So that's how I found the work. And since then I've just been doing it and doing some training in Ireland. And so, yeah, I answer that question a little bit.
It does, and what comes to mind to me is that we seem to live in a society whose rituals seem to be centered around technology and the use and development of technology, rather than the rituals surrounding our place in the natural world. I remember a quantum physicist I was talking with, and he was talking about what we do to the outside world, we have already done to ourselves. And sometimes when you take a look at what we've done to the outside world, you realize, have we devastated our inner selves that much?
Right. So kind of the core founding of this belief system for this work, going back, to the Druids and the Celts, is this idea that there is no separation between us and nature. It's not that we just go for a walk in nature. I need to get out today. I need to go for a hike. I need to, go for a walk in nature. For me and for them, that wasn't it at all. There was no separation. There was no difference because we are nature. And so I think that very much at the core of this is really going deeper into understanding that there really is no separation. And so, what we do to the world, what we do to what we're doing to the mother, basically, with pollution and all the horrific things that are happening in humanity and with the earth, there's really no separation from what we're doing with that and what we're doing to ourselves. Mm-hmm. So that's very much a core of this work.
Now, it's interesting, as I was mentioning earlier, is the fact that we don't seem to have, I would call it, a spiritual, ritualistic practice. When I think of Celtic, in the Celtic ways, there seems to be ritual. There seems to be rites of passage and celebration. And it doesn't feel that deep sometimes when you take a look at the things we celebrate, especially here in America. It seems that every other weekend there's a holiday that we're supposed to look at and celebrate, but we don't really have a connection to that, so to speak. So when you help people through your work of healing, is that one of the areas that you really try to develop a deeper meaning for people, is to find rituals that are meaningful for them?
Yeah, that's a really important point because a lot of the tribal traditions, if you go back in a lot of different tribal ancestries, the First Nations and the Celts and Druids and pretty much all over the world, we are very community-based, tribal-based societies, and so which have, worked together for hundreds and thousands of years. And so what we have today are for me personally, I grew up in California, and my ancestry is from Ireland and Scotland, and so not having grown up in a tribe or even on the same land as where my ancestors were from, for me that was a very deep disconnection. And what I find when I'm working with people is there very much is that disconnection to tribe, not really having a belonging or a place in the world. And this can be, we've lost our rituals, we've lost our medicine people in our communities. Who do you go to when something comes up? Who can help you? And the support system and networks. And so a lot of people, and for me, myself, I was living without this support. I was living without a community, so to speak of. And to have found that with this work, to finally have found my tribe, basically my global tribe, and then to have journeyed to the place where my ancestors were from. And Jared Lyons, who trained me, my teacher, will talk often about how it's really important before you die, at least once in your life, to visit the places that are in your ancestry. So to have stepped foot on Ireland soil, to literally just be in the place where my ancestors are from and stand on the turf, their bones are in the turf, ancestors. And to just be in that place, for me, was very significant and allowed me to have a deeper connection to who I am, where I'm from, that I can carry with me no matter where I go physically. And so, rituals, we see a lot of young people, a lot of, boys becoming men, and there were very significant rituals that would transition boys into men. And we've also very much lost that in our society, and it's a big problem. We see that, in urban settings, you see gangs popping up and initiations within gangs, and in some ways these are very much just a way that they're trying to replace what these what we've kind of evolved to have in our tribes, in our lives, are being replaced with things like gangs and initiations like that. So it's a problem, and we, in the work that I do, there are ceremonies and rituals and things like that And when I work directly with people, we can go into those feelings of where the disconnection is lying, and often ancestry comes in. Where are your ancestors from? Because that comes in so often. Actually, it's really surprising how significant that seems to be. People who are from Eastern Europe and just really all over the world, because we carry the memories of our ancestors in ourselves, in our bones and in our body, and so and there is no separation between us and our ancestors either. So when you're working on yourself, when I work on myself and go deeper on things that I need to work on, while I'm healing myself, I'm also healing my ancestors as well. So I don't know if that makes sense, but that's sort of a little bit of how I go about it and how I look at it and stuff.
Well, that makes a lot of sense when you think about the fact that when you heal yourself, you begin to heal your ancestors, because you are an extension of that ancestry. And I think it's so important that people come to understand where they come from and who they are. And, you kind of wonder this day and age when all these pseudo-identities are put up in front of us, whether it's, you're watching a television program, for instance, where somebody is trying to become, the next pop star, or you're watching another show where a group of people are on an island and they're trying to survive, so to speak, through teamwork, but then trying to eliminate each other all at the same time, or, even The Apprentice. We all got to work as a team on this project, and somebody's going to get fired. It's like, you take a look at these pseudo-identities that we have created, and you think to yourself, no wonder we seem so screwed up sometimes.
Yeah. It's I think it's a challenge. A lot of people are just trying to find their place. Just trying to find their place in the world and doing whatever they can. I don't know. There is a big disconnection, I think, on a lot of different levels.
I think, when it comes to the Celtic traditions, the mythology is really fascinating to me because of how much they, I guess the best word I could use would be incantate when it comes to nature and how they were deeply connected to it. I mean, everything is alive. Everything had a place. Everything had an identity that was given with honor. And, this day and age, I remember there was a time I'm walking through the woods with a couple of teenagers, and they just walked with their arms folded, stared ahead. They just couldn't wait for the whole thing to be done. And at the end of the day, I said, well, what did you think of that? And they said, oh, that just was a bunch of trees. I'm like, really? Wow. Couldn't wait to get back to that computer. Couldn't wait to get back to that cell phone, whatever the case is. And I think, that's kind of sad how maybe things are going to look for them 10 years down the road.
Yeah, I know. It is, and, I come from, basically, from when I was very young. I was the kind of the opposite child. I was in the woods all the time, and it was, for me, looking back on it now, it made a lot of sense, like nature was in some ways, very much my church, and then now it's almost like I can feel this depth to it. You can go out into a forest and there's a depth. You can almost feel the mystery just existing in the trees, right, existing in the air around you. And not everyone experiences that and comes in that way and has that background. And we have all these mindsets and belief systems and behavior patterns and limitations that we grow up with and that we carry from our parents, and that are just in us. And so part of what the work does and what I've experienced with it is it strips away those. So it strips away anything that's not serving us. So anything that's kind of blocking our connection or our mindsets or behavior patterns that limit us and self-imposed prisons, right? So we create all of this. We create all of this within ourselves, and or it's created for us, or it comes down from past traumas or what have you. And so yeah, I mean, I have a very deep connection with nature now, deeper than I had any other time in my life, and I recognize that there are others that don't, and yeah, it is sad when you see that happen with the children, but yeah, I don't know. It's the Celts and the Druids were just so incredible, and I mean, the history books it's different, right? There's a lot of different. It's hard to know exactly who they were because the histories. There's a lot of conflicting information and stuff when you go into the books. But a lot of times, when the teachings come in through the work from them or from Jer, and the Druids. So oak was another word for Druid. So the word was the same for Druid and for oak. And they had many different names for all the different trees in the forest, right? So they had growths of different trees in the forest, all which had different energies and properties and healing medicines. And yeah, they were just very much extensions of themselves. And all of the healing, all of the medicine that one needed existed in all of nature and all of creation. There was really nothing that could not be healed. There really is nothing that cannot be healed, that does not exist out there, right? That does not exist in creation. And you've heard people, spiritual teachers, talk about this, I'm sure, on their show and other places. And psychic surgeons will say there's nothing that can't be cured, right? And for me, when I say nature, for me, nature is the same as when someone says the divine or God. There's no difference for me. So when I say nature, for me that's saying God. And so there really is nothing that cannot be cured. It's just a matter of going into that medicine. And I think, unfortunately, a lot of tools or ways to go about this have been at least lost or not used. And the Druids, they're pretty famous for not having written anything down, right? So they're very much an oral tradition, and which is quite amazing, actually. A lot of the training would take over 20 years to become, a high Druid, and nothing was really written down. And so there's very little known about them and about how they went about with a lot of the healing that they did. But I think that in my experience and, my limited experience with other teachers, I've had many teachers, but with like First Nations and other traditions, I think there's a lot of similarities in just we're stripping away the complexities of the mind, right? So when we strip away the mind, and the mind tends to like to make a lot of things complex, and what about this and what about that and all of these different things, and we strip those away and we come back to this simple fundamental truth about healing and about God and how we can tap into this limitless resource for healing. I think that that carries across many different disciplines and boundaries and around the world with different, shamanism and Mongolia and the tribal healers in Africa and things like that. So yeah, hopefully it's a little bit about that.
Well, it's just amazing to consider for the listeners out there to understand that you have a master's degree in biology and environmental science. I mean, you're big about really looking at and understanding ecosystems and how they work, how everything interdependently works together. And, as you begin to go into this and then maybe even apply physics, for instance, you realize what a shame it is that we ever thought we were separated in the first place, as we are just as interdependent on the natural world as the natural world is for us to be here. I mean, there's a lot that we bring to each other. And I would see that sometimes a lot of sickness, illness, maybe mental dysfunction is a direct result of us feeling somewhere along the way that is out there and I'm here, that, I feel alone, for instance. When somebody comes to you to, I guess, look to see how they can change that, turmoil going on, What is it exactly you do to guide them to the direction they want to go?
Yeah, it's a good question. Very much, basically, when someone comes and it's their first time, and they're just having issues with whatever the specific issue is, if it's a trauma or a pattern that they'd like to work on, or depression, or whatever that specific thing is for them. We sit down and we go into it. We start to talk about it, and really at the core of this work is to deeply listen, right? So I don't know if you've experienced this in life, and many of us have, probably maybe not aware of it, but there are very few people out there that truly deeply, and I mean deeply, listen to what you say. And there is so much power and medicine in just deeply listening. And I think that a lot of times people have issues with things like therapies or counseling because, yeah, they're listening, but there's sometimes there's not the depth that's needed, right? So in my own
there's a sense, for instance, that the therapist may be judging them.
Yes, and whether or not this person is that can be picked up in the field, right? That can be felt. And so when I work with someone, we go into it and we see where the disconnection is or where they're having issues with. And yeah, I guess my background in biology, and I've worked in a lot of different ecosystems and around the world, and it's so beautiful how much similarity there is, right, in the health of kind of the human body, the human psyche, and similarities with healthy ecosystems. And so, like, using kind of that analogy of, if you think of like an isolated pond or an isolated pool of water that's just been sitting there, right, completely cut off, isolated from the river, from the source water. It's sitting there in stagnation, and it's diseased water. You can't drink it. Nothing can flourish. Nothing can live there or grow. So if you can think about that in sort of our body, if we carry around diseases or illness or sickness in our body, if we've been cut off and it's just sitting, stagnation, so the energy just sits in your body in kind of a stagnation, and that can form disease and illness and sickness. It's very much just the same as a pond, right? So what the work does is it attempts and calls in this energy that you can look at it as, the great river, the great source energies straight from God, right? So the healing energy, and so it connects that pond, that stagnation, back to source, back to the river, where it can bring in fresh new water, fresh new energy, and release the sickness and the stagnation and anything that's not serving. So it can bring you back to full flourishing health, and it completely changes, right? So nature's always changing. There's not ever a time when nature is not changing. There's mudslides, there's landslides, it's dynamic. And so a lot of people, and my experience in working with people and hearing people talk, and in my personal journey, a lot of times issues happen when we try to fight that, when we try to fight the change that's coming into our lives and trying to kind of redirect us, which is what nature does, is it tries to redirect us as things dynamically change. And when we try to fight that and sort of just stick in one spot and kind of put our feet down, stamp our feet down, no, I'm not moving, I'm standing right here, I'm going to stay in this place, in this stagnation, and whether we're doing that consciously or not, this is where sometimes a lot of issues come up, and disease and sickness. Mm-hmm. So yeah, that makes some sense, but so just kind of going into that stagnation, asking for it to be released, asking to be shown, what's underneath this, going to the root cause. So core and cellular transformation, which Jer, he calls the word core and cellular transformation, and the core part of that is just going deeply into what is at the core, what is at the root of this issue, so to speak. Not on the superficial level, but to just go really, really deep and try to address it, bring it up, bring it to the surface, look at it, what is at the core of what's causing this to happen in our life, and then to ask it to be transformed. So.
That's fascinating. It's kind of must be interesting when people come to you to change, whatever that may be. It's individual, of course, but how your approach is to all of this, what is usually the response?
The response for the person that's coming.
Yeah, as they come to you and they say, so this is how you're going to do this, huh? And you kind of wonder, I bet they just don't know what to expect, do they?
No, they don't. No, definitely. And I didn't know what to expect too when I sat down, the first time. Like, what is this? What is this all about? And it was my first experience with like really deep healing. And I admit I was skeptical and sort of like, I don't know what to expect. And usually when people come, they don't. I'll hear things. They'll tell me things like, well, I don't know why I called you, but I just know that I'm supposed to be here. I don't really know why.
Wow.
And I'm here, and this is what's going on for me. People will come with that information, and then, so I'll give them, people who haven't sat in the circles before, I'll talk a little bit about sort of what we do and how it works a little bit, and you never know what's going to happen, right? You never know what's going to come up, and usually they last, a couple hours, and it's just you never really know what's going to come up. And people sometimes ask if they should bring, things to work on to the sessions, and they certainly can, and people certainly do, but sometimes that's not even what ends up being addressed or worked on. It's something completely different or something deeper. You never know. So
I always find that fascinating that somebody may come in and they'll say, for instance, I would like to work on a way that I can get the kind of relationship with somebody that I'd like to have, a loving relationship, a partner, something like that, and that you completely, seemingly work on something totally different that seems almost irrelevant to why they're there, but yet it takes care of that and a few other things they never even expected, and that's what I mean, as the natives of America would call it, the web of life, that you're taking care of this string over here when it was this string you thought you needed taken care of, but you took care of these things over here, and it just dynamically affected the whole web.
Yeah, definitely. I think the energy that we work with and that I work with has its own consciousness in itself, right? So there's almost this, it takes on kind of a life of its own, and what we have a lot of times, what our mind has in mind for us, right? So what our goals and agendas are have nothing to really do with what ends up happening sometimes, because the energy will work with what's there and in divine timing, right, and in divine order. So whatever's the most ready to be released or to be worked on or to be pushed up in beautiful divine timing is often what ends up happening. And I've started to, this is definitely a daily lesson for me, because sometimes I'll try to fight that, right? I don't understand why I'm following the energy and I need to go to one place when I really want to go another place, but then in the end sometimes it just makes sense that was the flow of the energy. And so a lot of times when we just let go of our agenda and our mind and surrender, just surrender to it, it's really beautiful what can come up when we don't fight it, and we just let it unfold and unravel the way that it's all in divine timing. So.
In your experience of doing this, do you find that people tend to fight too hard for a living?
To fight too hard for...
just being alive, that, being alive just seems to be a struggle for them, or they're just fighting too hard. Because you were mentioning about going with the flow of energy, you see, and that generally when you're flowing, life seems to be a lot easier than it does when you're struggling, you're fighting for it.
Yeah. Yeah, it does, doesn't it, sometimes?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. This has been sort of my very recent journey, is just really discovering what that means, because it's almost a skill in itself, and just being able to just completely surrender to the flow of the energy, but then also to find that balance of the mind too, because we do need to do things like function in the world as well. So yeah, I mean, in my own personal journey, speak for myself, I fought the flow. Looking back at it, I really fought it tooth and nail. I had my own beliefs on where I was supposed to be, where I was supposed to live, the jobs I was supposed to have, the perfect whatever. And I fought it so hard that I became the isolated pawn. I was in stagnation, and and it did not serve me. It definitely was very, very detrimental to my soul and to my nature and who I am, and the passion, right? So when we feel passion and we feel like we're alive, that's the soul. That's the soul calling to us, and we feel pulled to different places or people or experiences. It's just something that I try to really look at now. Try to really look at what that pull is, what that means exactly. So.
Always a fascinating conversation when you deal with the intricacies of the intimacy of our interconnection and interdependentness on this whole experience here, especially if you go back to the ancients like what you're talking about. And it's very eye-opening, to say the least. Is there a website that people can find out more about you and your work?
Yeah, absolutely. I have a website, and it's called CelticSpiritMedium.com, and I'd also encourage people, if they're really interested, to look at Ger Lyon's website, and it's gerlyons.net. And Ger is a seer and a mystic from Ireland, and he's been developing this work over 20 years, and it goes back. Basically, he has ancestry and descendants from pre-Celtic times, so from the Druids, and the work is very much carried in his body and his bones, and he's just a phenomenal healer. I've just witnessed incredible healings that he's been a part of and facilitated, and he's just an incredibly humble person and teacher, and just amazing. And so I'd recommend, if anyone's interested and has a call to Ireland, or if they've had that in them, or if they've just feel, or not even Ireland, but anywhere in their lives, anywhere in the world where they've felt drawn and don't know why, they're searching for something, and so gerlyons.net, and then my website is CelticSpiritMedium.com. And yeah, I'd love if anyone wants to contact me and has more questions or about the work or about anything. Yeah, be happy.
Yeah, it's fascinating when you talk about being drawn to something and you don't know why. And I had an interesting example just a couple of years ago where there was just a period, I think it was 2 or 3 days, I kept thinking about this boys' club that I used to go to in Southern California when I was about in the 3rd grade. And it got to a point where I was almost obsessed about this, where I had to look it up. I mean, I just actually got up out of bed, went online, and just to see is it still there, And sure enough, I believe it was. So I called them the next day, and I said, I'm just, Colin, are you the same boys club? And I kind of described the area, and they said, yeah, this is the same one, been here for 75 years, or something like 75 years. But he says, it's really weird that you're calling, because we're celebrating 75 years, and we were hoping we could reach back into the past and have alumni actually call and describe what it was like to be a member of this boys club. And I thought, wow, that's pretty amazing, because I never had that kind of an obsession. for this boys club. I mean, it's always fun to remember, but that particular period of time, I just had to call these guys, and they said, well, it's because we're celebrating 75 years, you know. And I hadn't even talked to anybody there since, 1974, I guess.
Yeah.
I know what you mean about being drawn to something. Go with it, folks. You'll be really surprised at what lies at the other end of the tunnel, believe me.
Yeah, it's so interesting when that happens, isn't it? It's like these intuitive hits that we get, and because it's all in the field, it's all existing in that field, and just being able to feel that and to trust it, right? Feeling it's one thing, and then trusting it's a whole other thing.
Yeah, that's funny when it works out that way.
Yeah.
That website one more time.
Yeah, my website is CelticSpiritMedium.com.
Very good. Malia, thank you so much for joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program. What a treat.
Thank you, Daniel. It's so nice to talk with you.
We're going to have more for you at our website at beyond50radio.com, so be sure to visit us there. And also follow us at Twitter at beyond50radio.com, hashtag beyond50radio. We want to thank you for tuning in. I'm Daniel Davis, and remember, live your day past halfway.